Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku controlled an army of undead heroes and villains. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Kyoshi Ward shopping district tasted of sugar and opportunity. It was a sweet, cloying mixture of crepe stands and designer perfume, a scent Izuku Midoriya was beginning to associate with the mundanity of peace. For the past 3 hours, he and the pro-hero Crust had walked a designated patrol route, a winding path through a canyon of glittering glass and polished steel, and the most exciting event had been helping a lost child find her mother. It was, by all accounts, a perfect day for a work-study patrol. You're still doing it, you know. Crust's voice rumbled beside him, deep and steady as a mountain. The number 6 pro-hero was a formidable presence, his body a fortress of muscle and his quirk-enhanced armor gleaming like brushed platinum in the afternoon sun. But his eyes, visible through his helmet's visor, held a gentle warmth that belied his imposing stature. Izuku jumped, his muttering cutting off with an audible click of his teeth. Sorry, Crust-san. I was analyzing the support structures of the sky bridge and hypothesizing potential evacuation routes in the event of a villain with a seismic or localized gravity quirk. The pedestrian flow is heavily concentrated, and the choke points near the station could be catastrophic if... He trailed off, cheeks burning. Crust chuckled, a sound like shifting stone. I'm not scolding you, Midoriya. That analytical mind of yours is a weapon. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. But you're thinking like a strategist. A hero on the ground has to think like a shield, too. He tapped the massive shield strapped to his back. It wasn't his quirk, but a piece of support gear he favored. His real power, shield, manifested as translucent barriers of pure defensive energy. A strategist sees the board. A shield sees the piece that's about to be taken. The piece, the person. Izuku corrected himself quietly. Exactly. Crust stopped, turning to face him fully. They stood before a towering water fountain sculpture, its gentle splashing a counterpoint to the city's hum. One for all is the ultimate sword, a power meant to strike down evil. But a sword with no shield is just a weapon of destruction. A hero's purpose isn't to destroy. It's to protect. Everything we do, every punch we throw, is in service of that protection. Don't ever forget which one is the means, and which one is the end. The words settled deep in Izuku's chest, resonating with a truth he had always felt but never so clearly articulated. He looked down at his own hands, the scarred knuckles and the phantom ache of power thrumming just beneath the skin. Since the sports festival, his control over full cowling had grown by leaps and bounds. He could hold 8% consistently now, a faint tracery of emerald lightning dancing over his suit. It felt like a live thing, a storm he was learning to conduct rather than just contain, but Crust's words framed it differently. It wasn't just a storm to be aimed. It was a force to be wielded in defense of the calm. I understand, Izuku said, his voice filled with a new sincerity. Thank you, Crust-san. Good. Now let's see if that analysis of yours extends to finding the best takoyaki stand in a 3-block radius. A hero's work is also about morale. The easy camaraderie was a balm to Izuku's perpetually anxious soul. For all his power and rank, Crust treated him not as a burden or a volatile intern, but as a peer in the making. He listened to Izuku's theories, corrected his posture, and shared stories of his own rookie days. It was a mentorship Izuku hadn't even realized he was craving. They were just debating the merits of extra ginger versus extra bonito flakes when the world went silent. It wasn't a true silence. The city's hum was still there, the fountains still splashed. But it was as if a pressure wave had sucked all the immediate, sharp sounds out of the air, the chatter, the footsteps, the distant traffic. For a single, horrifying second, there was only a low, resonant hum, like a tuning fork struck against the fabric of reality. And then came the roar. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound of pure, unmaking force. It erupted from the far end of the plaza, a wave of gray that pulsed outward with sickening speed. A multi-story department store, its windows reflecting the clear blue sky, simply dissolved. There was no explosion, no fire, no crumbling debris. One moment it was a solid structure of concrete and steel. The next it was a roiling cloud of fine, gray dust, collapsing in on itself in a silent, horrifying implosion. Panic was a physical thing, a tidal wave of screams and bodies that crashed through the plaza. The scent of sugar and perfume was instantly replaced by the dry, chalky taste of atomized concrete. "Villain attack!" Crust's voice cut through the chaos, an anchor in the storm. He didn't hesitate. A massive, translucent shield, easily 20 feet wide, sprang into existence before them, deflecting a secondary pulse of the gray energy that shot out from the dust cloud. The energy impacted the shield with a sound like grinding glass, and hairline fractures appeared in the air before sealing themselves. Izuku's mind was racing, trying to catch up to the horror his eyes were seeing. Disintegration quirk? No, that's not right. Disintegration implies breaking down. This is unmaking. An erasure quirk. Range appears to be area of effect with directed pulses. High level. S rank, easily. Civilians trapped. The skybridge, my evacuation routes. Midoriya, with me! Crust commanded, his body already a blur of motion. West side! Get the civilians moving toward the subway entrance! I'll hold the line! Right! Izuku activated full cowling, green lightning crackling around him. The world snapped into a slightly faster frame rate. He bounded over panicked crowds, his voice amplified by his suit's comms. This way! Everyone, to the station! Please stay calm and move quickly! He saw the source of the attack now. A figure stood in the center of the gray, swirling dust cloud where the department store had been. They were gaunt, wrapped in ragged black cloth, their face obscured by a gas mask-like apparatus humming with sickly purple light. They raised a hand, and the skybridge Izuku had been analyzing just minutes before became their target. Another silent roar, another pulse of gray. The center of the bridge vanished. The two remaining halves, laden with dozens of screaming people, groaned and began to tilt inward, threatening to collapse into the packed plaza below. No! Izuku's blood ran cold. Crust was already there. Two immense shields materialized, propping up the failing ends of the bridge like the hands of a titan. The strain was immediately visible on his face, sweat beading on his brow. Midoriya! The bridge! Get them off! Now! Izuku didn't need to be told twice. He ricocheted off a wall, his movements a green blur, and landed on the tilting structure. The metal creaked and shuddered beneath his feet. Everyone! Move toward the edges! Jump if you have to. I'll catch you. It was controlled chaos. He grabbed families, slinging children over his shoulder and leaping to the rooftops of nearby buildings before rocketing back. He yelled instructions, his voice hoarse, as he worked in a frantic rhythm, a green hummingbird of desperation. Below, Crust held fast, his shields groaning under the immense weight, the villain sending pulse after pulse of decaying energy to weaken his constructs. They were saving them. It was working, but the villain, this silent agent of entropy who Izuku's mind had dubbed Ashmaker, seemed to tire of the game. They lowered their hand from the bridge and pointed it directly at the densest crowd of fleeing civilians, the one that included the mother and child from earlier. Crust saw it. Izuku, dropping a panicked salaryman onto a safe roof, saw it. Their eyes met across the chaotic plaza. In that split second, Izuku saw the calculation in the hero's gaze, the terrible, noble math of sacrifice. A hero's shield is for others, Midoriya. Crust's voice crackled over the comms, calm and resolute. Remember that. The shields holding the bridge vanished. For a heart-stopping moment, gravity reasserted its authority. But Crust was already moving. He landed in front of the crowd, his back to the villain, and slammed his hands together. A dome of energy, more solid and layered than any Izuku had seen him create before, enveloped the entire group of civilians. It was his ultimate defense. A fortress of will and power. The great pulse from Ashmaker hit the dome. The sound was deafening, a shriek of tearing reality. The dome held, but turned a milky, fractured white. From Izuku's vantage point, he could see Crust's muscles straining, his teeth gritted, blood trickling from his nose. He was holding. He was protecting them, but he had left himself open. Ashmaker, with a slow, deliberate motion, turned their other hand and pointed it at the hero's unprotected back. Crust! Izuku screamed, launching himself from the rooftop, pushing one for all to a dangerous 15%. The air screamed past him. He was fast, faster than he'd ever been, but the distance was too great. He was a bullet fired a second too late. He saw the gray energy leave the villain's palm. He saw it cross the scant few feet to Krust's back. He saw the hero's armor, the strongest defensive gear in Japan, offer no more resistance than a sheet of paper. One moment, the pro-hero Krust was there, a pillar of defiance. The next, a hole of nothingness appeared in his back, expanding with silent, inexorable hunger. The edges of him turned to gray motes of dust and were swept away on an unfelt wind. His face, turned just slightly toward Izuku, held a look not of pain, but of grim satisfaction. His lips formed a single, silent word. Protect. Then he was gone. The dome flickered and died. The civilians he'd saved were unharmed, staring in numb horror at the empty space where their savior had just stood. Something inside Izuku broke. A roar of his own, one of pure, unadulterated fury, tore from his throat. He didn't think. He didn't analyze. He was no longer a strategist, or a shield. He was a sword. He hit the ground and came up in a blur, full cowling flaring to a blinding 20%. The ground cracked under his feet. He closed the distance to Ashmaker in a single, explosive leap. The villain, perhaps surprised by his speed or simply arrogant, was slow to react. They raised a hand, but Izuku was already there. Manchester! Smash! His axe kick, imbued with a sliver of the righteous power of his predecessors, came down like a guillotine. The villain brought up an arm, and the limb dissolved into dust just before the impact. Izuku's boot connected squarely with the villain's mask. The apparatus shattered, and the villain was thrown backward, skidding across the plaza. Izuku landed, his legs screaming in protest at the power he'd used. He saw the villain struggle to rise. He saw their face for the first time, shockingly young, with eyes burning with a nihilistic fury. Their own quirk was consuming them. The gray decay was crawling up their shattered arm, their body unable to contain the backlash of the power they had unleashed. A final, defiant pulse of energy erupted from the villain's chest, not aimed at anything, but an uncontrolled death throw. Izuku was too close, his body still recovering from the last attack. The gray wave washed over him. Pain, absolute and terrifying, seized his left arm. He watched in detached horror as the gauntlet of his hero costume turned to dust, followed by the skin and muscle beneath. It felt like being submerged in acid and ice at the same time. The unmaking crawled up his arm, past his elbow. He screamed, a raw, animal sound of agony, and collapsed. The world began to tunnel. The last thing he saw was the villain, Ashmaker, dissolving completely into a pile of fine gray dust, their own power their final executioner. The last thing he heard were the approaching sirens, and the panicked shouts of his own name. Then, the roar of the world faded, and he fell into a profound and terrifying silence. Darkness, not the simple absence of light, but a thick, viscous void that pressed in on him from all sides. There was no pain. No body. Just his consciousness, a single flickering ember adrift in an infinite, starless night. Am I dead? The thought was not panicked. It was clinical, a detached observation. He remembered Krust. He remembered the gray, the dust, the unmaking. He remembered the pain in his arm. A light ignited in the distance. The familiar, comet-like brilliance of One for All. It blazed with its usual warmth, a sun in the desolate emptiness. He felt its pull, the instinctive call of home. But something was wrong. Shadows, long and sharp, were being cast from the comet, something that had never happened before. The light of the vestiges flickered within it, their forms indistinct and agitated. He could feel their alarm, a distant chorus of confusion and fear that echoed across the void. And then he felt the cold. It seeped into the void from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was an ancient, profound cold, the chill of a tomb sealed for millennia, the absolute zero of a dead universe. It was an energy utterly alien to the vibrant, living power of One for All. It coiled through the darkness, a serpent of liquid night, and moved toward the comet. The vestiges recoiled. He felt Nana Shimura's concern, Daigoro Banjo's aggression, Haikyuu Shinomori's wary caution. They tried to push it back, but the cold was not an attack. It was a presence, an inevitability. It reached the edge of One for All's light and began to weave itself in. A thread of pure black, flecked with what looked like cold, distant starlight, spiraled around the core of brilliant energy. It did not diminish the light. It integrated with it, changing its very nature. The core of One for All, the heart of generations of sacrifice and hope, now had a heart of shadow, and from that shadow a new voice spoke. It was not like the voices of the other vestiges. It was a whisper that filled the entirety of the void, a sound that felt like crumbling stone and rustling leaves and the final sigh of a dying star. It wasn't in his ears. It was in the very concept of his soul. They are not gone. The voice was a paradox, filled with an immense, sorrowful power and a chilling, absolute certainty. They only await a voice to call them back. The darkness began to recede, not replaced by light, but by a dull, throbbing gray. The silence was broken by a steady, rhythmic beeping. The smell of antiseptic filled his non-existent nostrils. Reality, cold and unwelcome, was pulling him back. The void dissolved. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The first thing he registered was the white. White ceiling tiles, white walls, white sheets. The rhythmic beeping was a heart monitor beside his bed. A dull, aching pain throbbed in his left arm, which was swathed in thick bandages and held in a sling. He could feel the familiar, accelerated healing of Recovery Girl's work, a faint warmth knitting his mangled tissues back together. He was alive. He turned his head. The room was empty. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A calendar on the wall showed a date 4 days after the attack. He had been out for 4 days. Grief, sudden and overwhelming, hit him like a physical blow. "Crust," he whispered, his voice a dry, unused croak. The images flooded his mind, the shield, the smile, the dust. He had been right there. He could have been faster. He could have. He squeezed his eyes shut, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He had failed. A hero had died saving him. Saving others because he couldn't. The weight of it was crushing. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't alone. There were 2 figures standing at the foot of his bed. His first thought was that he was hallucinating. It was a stress response, a symptom of the trauma. His brain, unable to process the loss, was projecting an image, because the man on the right was the pro-hero Crust. He wasn't made of flesh and blood. He was composed of a soft, steady golden light, like sunlight filtered through honey. His form was perfect, right down to the determined set of his jaw and the powerful set of his shoulders. He was whole, translucent, his hero costume shimmering with ethereal energy. He stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm and observant. He looked exactly as he had moments before the attack, a paragon of heroic strength. Izuku's breath hitched. His heart monitor began to beat faster. Then he saw the figure on the left. Shackled to Crust by chains of what looked like solidified shadow was the villain, Ashmaker. His form was a chaotic vortex of malevolent crimson and black energy, distorted and flickering like a faulty hologram. The broken mask was still fused to his face, and the empty space where his arm had been was a roiling wound of dark energy. The ethereal chains, which seemed to originate from the floor around Izuku's bed, bound his wrists and neck, crackling with a faint purple light. The villain's spectral form pulled against them, his silent rage a palpable force in the room. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to connect the dots. This was a dream. A nightmare. It had to be. He blinked hard, shaking his head. It was a common technique to dispel hallucinations. See something impossible, blink, and it's gone. He opened his eyes. They were still there. Unmoving. Silent. Visible only to him. No! The word was a strangled gasp. He tried to push himself up, but his body was weak, and a sharp pain lanced through his arm. He fell back against the pillows, panting. No, 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 you're not real. You're not real. Crust's spectral head tilted slightly, an expression of gentle concern on his face. He took a half-step forward, but one of the shadowy chains pulsed, and he stopped, as if tethered. The villain, Ashmaker, thrashed against his bonds, a silent, furious scream twisting his chaotic form. Izuku could not hear them, but he could feel them. It wasn't a psychic link, not exactly. It was more fundamental. It was as if two new limbs had been attached to his soul without his permission. He could feel Crust's steadfast loyalty, a calm, reassuring presence that felt like a warm shield around a small part of his mind. And he could feel the villain's burning, nihilistic hatred, a cold, sharp point pressing against his psyche, constantly seeking a way to break free. He was their anchor. He was their warden. The words from the void echoed in his memory, no longer a mysterious whisper but a horrifying pronouncement. They are not gone. They only await a voice to call them back. His voice. He had called them back. In his grief, in his rage, in the moment his new, corrupted quirk had awakened, he had reached out and bound the souls of the hero who had died for him and the villain who had killed him. A wave of nausea washed over him. This was wrong. This was a desecration. This was a power no hero should ever possess. He squeezed his eyes shut again, focusing on the beeping of the monitor, the feel of the sheets, the pain in his arm, anything real, anything to chase away the impossible figures at the foot of his bed. They're not real. It's trauma. It's a side effect of my injuries. They're not real. He repeated the mantra in his head, a desperate prayer. After a long minute, his breathing evened out, and the frantic beeping of the monitor slowed to its steady rhythm. He took a deep, shuddering breath and slowly, tentatively, opened his eyes. The silence in the room was absolute. But it was a silence shared by three. The ghost of the hero and the specter of his killer stood waiting, their fates now irrevocably tied to the terrified boy in the hospital bed. And Izuku Midoriya knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the very marrow of his bones, that his life would never, ever be the same. The roar of the battle was over, but a new, terrifying silence had just begun, populated by the echoes of the dead. The scream that tore itself from Izuku's throat was raw and jagged, the sound of a mind fraying at the edges. It was a reflex action, a primal rejection of the impossible reality standing sentinel at the foot of his bed. In the same motion, he grabbed the closest object, a flimsy hospital pillow, and hurled it with all the panic strength he could muster. The pillow sailed through the air and passed directly through the shimmering, golden form of Crust. It didn't slow or deviate, continuing its trajectory as if the hero were made of smoke. It then passed through the writhing, chaotic mass of the villain, Ashmaker, before landing with a soft, pathetic puff on the linoleum floor. The act was so futile, so utterly disconnected from the specter's presence, that it felt like a final, damning confirmation of their unreality, and his insanity. The door to his room burst open. Recovery Girl stood there, her customary scowl replaced with a look of sharp, immediate concern. She was followed by a nurse pushing a cart of medical supplies. Midoriya? What's wrong? What happened? She demanded, her quick, professional eyes scanning the room, checking the monitors, and finally landing on Izuku's wide, terrified face. They're here! Izuku gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the empty space where the pillow had landed. They're right there! Can't you see them? Recovery Girl's expression softened into one of profound pity. She walked over, placing a gentle, wrinkled hand on his forehead. Her touch was warm and real, a stark contrast to the cold dread emanating from the foot of the bed. Easy, dearie. You've been through a monumental trauma. Your body is healing, but your mind needs time to catch up. It's not uncommon to experience vivid images. Post-traumatic stress disorder can manifest in many ways, especially with a quirk-related incident of this magnitude. No, it's not PTSD, Izuku insisted, his voice cracking. I know what I'm seeing. It's Crust-san. And the villain who... He couldn't finish the sentence. The image of the hero disintegrating into dust was seared onto the back of his eyelids. Sure. Recovery Girl's voice was firm but soothing. We're going to give you a mild sedative. You need to rest. Your mind is playing tricks on you, trying to process an event that no one, let alone a boy your age, should ever have to witness. The nurse administered a shot to his foredrip. Izuku wanted to fight, to pull the needle out, to scream until someone believed him, but a heavy, syrupy languor was already spreading through his limbs. His protests died in his throat. As his eyelids grew heavy, he felt something new. It wasn't a sight or a sound, but a feeling, an impression broadcast directly into his consciousness. From the golden, spectral form of Crust came a wave of calm reassurance. It felt like a warm, heavy blanket, a silent promise of protection. It was accompanied by a single, clear thought, not in words, but in pure intent: it is all right. Be calm. I am here. From the writhing crimson specter of Ashmaker, the sensation was the polar opposite. It was a blast of cold, razor-sharp hatred, a shriek of pure malevolence that scraped against the inside of his skull. It was a feeling of being trapped, of chewing on iron bars, of a bottomless desire for destruction and release. Let me go, you pathetic hero-worshipping child. Let me out. I will unmake you. I will unmake everything. This internal cacophony, this war of sensations, was the last thing he experienced before the sedative dragged him back under into a dreamless, artificial sleep. Over the next 2 days, Izuku's world shrank to the size of his hospital room, a sterile white box that felt more like a padded cell. He learned to stop talking about the ghosts. Every time he mentioned them, he was met with concerned glances, gentle dismissals, and another dose of sedatives. He was trapped in a nightmare only he could see, his sanity questioned by the very people trying to help him. The specters never left. They were a constant, silent fixture in the room. Crust remained at a respectful distance, a loyal, patient guard, his golden form radiating a quiet strength. Ashmaker, however, was a perpetual torment. He was constantly testing the limits of his shadowy bonds, lunging, thrashing, and clawing at the ethereal chains that held him. Each movement sent a spike of cold, vicious anger through Izuku's mind. It was in this forced quietude that Izuku began to understand the connection. It wasn't just sight, it was a link. He was a radio receiver, and they were two powerful, opposing stations broadcasting on the same frequency. Their emotions, their surface thoughts, their very essence bled into him. He began to think of his own mind as a barracks, a shared space where these two unwilling soldiers were quartered. It was crowded, and it was loud. The chorus of voices was ceaseless. Crust's presence was a low, steady hum, a foundation of duty and resolve. Protect the boy. This is the new mission. Uphold the ideal. His thoughts were clear, disciplined, and focused entirely on Izuku's well-being. It was a comforting weight, but a weight nonetheless, a constant reminder of the sacrifice that had birthed this terrible new power. Ashmaker's presence was a high-pitched, metallic shriek that never faded. His thoughts were a torrent of nihilistic rage and furious curses. Rage. Ruin. Decay. This prison of light and flesh, tear it down. Annihilate the puppet master. Return to the beautiful, silent dust. He was a psychic wound, a festering infection of hate that Izuku had to constantly wall off just to think straight. On the 3rd day after his awakening, Tashinori Yagi visited. He arrived in his skeletal form, looking more frail and worried than Izuku had ever seen him. He brought a bouquet of cheap plastic flowers that he placed awkwardly on the bedside table. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond his physical condition. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, All Might," Izuku lied, his eyes flicking nervously toward the foot of the bed. Crust's spectral form dipped his head in a gesture of respect toward the former number 1 hero. Ashmaker seemed to writhe with even greater intensity, his hatred flaring at the sight of the symbol of peace. Izuku flinched as the wave of malice washed over him. All Might noticed the flinch. "The doctors told me you've been distressed. That you're seeing things." His tone was gentle, paternal. "Izuku, my boy, what happened out there? It was not your fault." Crust was a true hero. He made a choice. The bravest choice any of us can make. Survivor's guilt is a heavy burden, but you must not let it consume you. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He wanted to believe him, to accept the comforting, logical explanation. But the cold spike of Ashmaker's rage and the warm hum of Crust's loyalty were undeniable realities in his head. "It's not guilt," Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. "He's here. He's right there, All Might. Standing next to the other one." All Might's face fell. He sighed, a long, rattling sound. He pulled a chair close to the bed, his joints creaking. "I've seen this before, my boy. Not often, but it happens. Heroes who face the abyss, sometimes the abyss stares back. There was a hero, years ago, Shieldhead. His partner was killed by a villain with a sonic quirk. For a year afterward, He heard his partner's voice in every loud noise. He had to retire. He was trying to help, trying to put Izuku's experience into a known box. But every word of dismissal felt like another brick in the wall separating Izuku from reality, from help, from sanity. Desperation clawed at his throat. "You don't believe me," Izuku said, the statement flat and devoid of hope. "I believe," All Might corrected softly, "that you are in a great deal of pain. And I believe that we will help you through it. UA has the best counselors, the best therapists." The conversation continued in circles, with All Might's gentle reassurances only serving to deepen Izuku's despair. He felt utterly alone, trapped with his ghosts in a world that refused to see them. When All Might finally left, promising to return the next day, Izuku felt a profound sense of failure. He couldn't even convince his own mentor. As the door clicked shut, the chorus in his head surged. Crust's aura radiated sorrow and a quiet frustration. He cannot see. He does not understand. How can I protect you if he does not believe? Ashmaker's shriek, on the other hand, was filled with triumphant mockery. Alone. The symbol of failure leaves his broken toy. Good. Let them abandon you. Let the madness take you. Shut up, Izuku whispered to the empty room, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. Both of you, just be quiet. For a fleeting second, the noise subsided. A sliver of silence. He had commanded, and they had, for a moment, obeyed. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a quirk. A terrifying, horrifying quirk, but a quirk nonetheless. And like any quirk, it had rules. He just needed to figure them out. He slid out of bed, his legs unsteady. The bandages on his arm felt heavy and awkward. He looked at his spectral companions. He was their master, their warden. A reluctant king on a throne of hospital sheets. If he was going to survive this, if he was going to prove he wasn't insane, he couldn't be a passive victim. He had to be a scientist. He had to experiment. He shuffled into the small, private bathroom adjoining his room and locked the door. The stark fluorescent light hummed overhead, making his reflection in the mirror look pale and haunted. The specters had followed him, their forms passing through the wall and door as if they weren't there. They now stood behind him, their images faint in the mirror's reflection. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and focused inward, past the pain and confusion, toward the link that bound him to them. He focused on Crust. He pictured the hero's golden form, his unshakable resolve. He didn't speak aloud. He thought the words, directing them like a focus beam. Crust-san? Can you hear my thoughts? The response was immediate and clear, a feeling of affirmative acknowledgement. Yes, Commander. The title sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. Commander. It implied a hierarchy, a duty. It implied control. He pushed on, his heart hammering against his ribs. I need to know what you can do. What I can do. Can you interact with things? With the real world? A sense of uncertainty from Crust. I do not know. The pull to you is absolute. My will is my own, but my actions are yours to command. The link feels malleable. Izuku opened his eyes. He looked at the porcelain sink. Okay, he whispered to his reflection. Okay. He focused his will, pouring every ounce of concentration he had into a single, simple command directed at the hero's spirit. Crust-san, touch the sink. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air in the small bathroom grew thick and cold. A low hum, like a powerful electrical transformer, filled the silence. Izuku felt a draining sensation, a dizzying pull at the back of his mind, as if his own mental energy was being siphoned away and converted into something else. A sharp pain lanced behind his right eye. He watched in the mirror as Crust's shimmering golden form grew brighter, more defined. The translucent quality lessened, replaced by a solid, opalescent glow. The hero raised his hand, and the movement was no longer ethereal but deliberate, cutting through the air with a tangible weight. His glowing fingers reached out and touched the faucet. Clink. The sound was small, barely audible, but it was the most significant sound Izuku had ever heard. It was real. A spectral hand had made contact with a physical object. The faucet handle visibly vibrated from the impact. The air around Krust's hand shimmered with displaced heat, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The strain on Izuku was immense. His vision swam with black spots, and he had to grip the edge of the sink with his good hand to keep from collapsing. A warm trickle of blood ran from his nose and dripped onto the white porcelain, a stark crimson splash. He broke the connection, gasping for breath. Krust's form immediately faded back to its translucent state, his hand passing back through the faucet. The cold in the room receded, and the oppressive humming stopped. The mental drain ceased, leaving Izuku with a skull-splitting headache and a profound sense of exhaustion. He had done it. It wasn't in his head. It was real. The knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. His mind, ever analytical, immediately started cataloging the data. Manifestation requires significant mental energy from me. It creates a localized drop in temperature and an audible hum. The manifested spirit can physically interact with the world. A new, more daring thought entered his mind. If Krust could touch things, could he still use his quirk? He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand, his breathing still ragged. He looked at the hero's reflection in the mirror, his own eyes burning with a desperate, scientific fervor. Krust-san, your quirk. Shield. Can you still use it? This time, the feeling from the hero was one of quiet confidence. The power is still within me. It feels connected to your own. An extension of your will. Okay. Izuku whispered, steadying himself. Let's try. A small one. Just a small shield. Right here. In front of the mirror, he braced himself, focusing his will again. He didn't just command this time, he visualized. He pictured Krust's shields, the layers of translucent energy, the way they refracted light, the feeling of absolute, unbreachable defense they represented. He poured that image, that feeling, into his connection with the hero. The drain on his energy was 10 times worse. The air didn't just grow cold, it frosted over. A thin layer of ice spread out from Izuku's feet on the tile floor. The humming sound rose and pitched to a painful whine. The lights in the bathroom flickered violently. A searing pain, like a hot needle, shot through Izuku's temples. He gritted his teeth, a low groan escaping his lips as he pushed more and more of his energy into the manifestation. In the air in front of the mirror, a faint rectangle of light began to form. It wavered, shimmering like a heat haze, before slowly solidifying. It was a perfect, foot-wide replica of one of Krust's shields, glowing with the same soft, golden light as the hero himself. It was faint, almost transparent, but it was there. It existed. A ghost quirk, brought back into the world of the living. Izuku held it for 3 seconds before his strength gave out completely. He collapsed to the floor, his head spinning, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The shield vanished with a faint pop, and the room returned to normal. He lay there, gasping on the icy tiles, the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. He had done it. But the cost was immense. Just a small shield for a few seconds had nearly rendered him unconscious. What would a real battle require? His triumph was short-lived, cut through by the shriek of the other ghost. Ashmaker had been watching the entire experiment, his form vibrating with a mixture of fury and something else. A covetous hunger. Power! You give the dead power. Give it to me. Let me wield my ruin again. Let me erase this filthy world. The demand was so violent, so invasive, that Izuku physically recoiled, scrambling back until his shoulders hit the bathroom door. He had absolute command, but the personalities remained. Using a willing hero was one thing. What would it mean to force a resentful, nihilistic villain to use their power for his purposes? The moral weight of that question was as crushing as the physical strain of the quirk itself. The next afternoon, All Might returned. He looked tired, his already deep-set eyes shadowed with worry. He had clearly spent the night consulting with others, trying to find a solution for his successor's apparent breakdown. Young Midoriya, he began, his voice gentle. I've spoken with Principal Nizu and Hound Dog. We think it would be best if you were transferred to a more specialized facility for a little while. A place where they are better equipped to help you with this kind of trauma. Izuku's blood ran cold. They were going to send him away. To a psychiatric hospital. They were going to label him, medicate him, and tried to convince him that the two souls tethered to his own were just figments of his imagination. He would be useless, locked away while his friends were training, while villains were planning. The desperation that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My boy, please understand." "No, you don't understand." Izuku sat up, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made All Might pause. "I am not crazy. I am not hallucinating. And I can prove it." All Might sighed, the sound full of pity. "Izuku, please!" Izuku begged, his voice cracking. He was on the verge of tears, not from sadness, but from sheer, soul-crushing frustration. This was his last chance. "Just stand there. Don't move. Please, just give me one chance to show you." Something in his tone, the raw, unvarnished desperation, seemed to get through to the hero. All Might hesitated, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. He stood near the window, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of concern and weary skepticism. Izuku turned his gaze to the foot of his bed. He locked eyes with the spectral form of Crust. There was no need for mental commands now. The hero understood completely. He gave Izuku a single, infinitesimal nod of his own, his golden eyes filled with resolve. Izuku took a deep breath, bracing himself for the strain. He focused his will, not on a shield or a simple touch, but on a full, visible manifestation. He didn't just push his energy. He opened a floodgate. He poured his focus, his desperation, his frantic need to be believed, into the link. The room plunged into an immediate, shocking cold. The heart monitor beside the bed began to waver, its screen flickering as if from an electromagnetic pulse. The plastic flowers on the nightstand frosted over. All Might shivered, his breath misting in the air as he looked around in confusion. "What is this?" he began. Then he saw it. In the space between Izuku's bed and the door, the air began to shimmer, to distort, as if a powerful lens was being twisted into focus. A soft, golden light bled into reality, coalescing from a formless mist into a distinct, humanoid shape. It grew brighter, more solid, the details sharpening with impossible clarity, the powerful set of the shoulders, the distinct lines of the hero costume's armor, the noble, determined set of the jaw beneath a spectral helmet. In the space of 5 seconds, the shimmering ghost of the pro-hero Crust, the number 6 hero in Japan, stood fully manifested in the hospital room. He was not translucent now, but a solid figure of radiant golden light, so bright he cast his own soft shadows on the floor. All Might stared, his jaw slack, his blue eyes wide with utter, uncomprehending shock. The skepticism on his face melted away, replaced by raw, naked disbelief, which in turn gave way to horrified awe. He recognized the stance. He recognized the armor. He had stood beside that man in meetings a dozen times. He had seen him on the news, on the battlefield. He had mourned his death just days ago. The ghost turned its head slightly, and its golden eyes met All Might's. Tashinori Yagi, the man who had faced down all for one and one, the symbol of peace who had shouldered the hopes of a nation for decades, took a stumbling step backward. His knees buckled, and he sank into the visitor's chair, his skeletal frame looking as though it might collapse entirely. "By the stars and stripes!" he breathed, the words a choked, disbelieving whisper. Crust, the secret was out. Izuku wasn't losing his mind. He was in command of an army of the dead. The silence that followed the manifestation of Crust's spirit was heavier than any reinforced concrete. It was a dense, suffocating thing, filled with the impossible truth that now stood shimmering in the middle of the hospital room. All Might, the former symbol of peace, a man who had stared down legions of villains, and the embodiment of evil itself, was rendered utterly speechless. He sat collapsed in the visitor's chair, his skeletal frame trembling, his wide blue eyes fixed on the golden specter of his fallen comrade. Izuku's own breathing was ragged, his body screaming in protest. The manifestation had been a desperate, uncontrolled flood of energy, and the backlash was immediate. A skull-splitting migraine hammered at his temples, and his bandaged arm throbbed with a phantom agony that felt chillingly real. The room was still unnaturally cold, a thin layer of frost creeping up the windowpane. He had proven he wasn't crazy, but in doing so, he had unleashed something that felt far more dangerous than simple madness. The spectral form of Crust, ever the professional, turned his head from All Might and looked at Izuku. A wave of concern, sharp and clear, washed over Izuku's mind. Commander, you are overexerting yourself. The strain is too great. Before Izuku could respond, the door to the room slid open. Aizawa stood in the doorway, a file in one hand and a thermos in the other. His perpetually tired eyes took in the scene with a speed that belied his sluggish demeanor. The frost on the window, All Might's shocked state, Izuku's pale and sweating face, and the impossible, glowing figure of a dead hero standing in the center of the room. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the only outward sign of his shock. The thermos slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor and spilling hot coffee in a steaming puddle. He didn't seem to notice. His gaze was locked on Crust. What? Aizawa said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. In the hell is that? The question broke the spell. All Might flinched, as if waking from a trance. He looked from Crust's ghost to Izuku, then to Aizawa, his mind finally catching up to the horrifying new reality. Aizawa, you see him too? All Might's voice was hoarse. I see the number 6 hero, who was officially declared disintegrated 4 days ago, standing in Midoriya's hospital room. Aizawa stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a defense mechanism against the sheer irrationality of the situation. He took a slow step inside, his eyes never leaving the ghost. His hand instinctively went to the capture weapon around his neck. Midoriya, explain. Now, the demand was absolute. With a final, agonizing effort of will, Izuku let the manifestation collapse. The golden light of Crust's form imploded in an instant, leaving behind only the normal, sterile air of the room. The oppressive cold vanished, and the temperature began to normalize. To Aizawa and All Might, it was as if he had simply disappeared. To Izuku, Crust's translucent, shimmering form simply returned to its post at the foot of his bed, the drain on Izuku's mind ceasing. The sudden release from the strain sent a wave of vertigo through Izuku. He slumped back against his pillows, his vision swimming with black spots. It's my quirk. He managed to gasp out, the words feeling heavy and foreign in his mouth. Something new. It awakened after the attack. The next hour was a blur of tense, disbelieving interrogation. Aizawa, his logical worldview shattered, became a machine of pure inquiry. He grilled Izuku on every detail, when it started, what it felt like, who he could see, what they could do. All Might, still visibly shaken, mostly listened, his gaze fixed on the empty space where Crust had stood, occasionally murmuring the hero's name like a prayer. They cleared the hospital floor, citing a potential quirk-related contamination. The explanation was that Midoriya's trauma had caused a temporary but volatile mutation in One for All, which was technically true. By the time the sun began to set, a decision had been made. Izuku could not stay here. He was not a patient with a psychological condition. He was, as Aizawa had grimly put it, a walking, talking singularity-level event. The transfer to UA was a clandestine affair conducted in the dead of night. There was no ambulance, only a black, unmarked van with tinted windows. Aizawa drove, his eyes constantly scanning the road. All Might sat in the back with Izuku, a thick blanket draped over his shoulders despite the mild weather, as if he were trying to ward off a chill that had sunk deep into his bones. Izuku stared out the window at the blurred city lights. The silent chorus in his head was a chaotic symphony. Crust's spirit radiated a calm sense of duty, his focus entirely on the new situation. Ashmaker's specter, however, was a vortex of fury, his hatred amplified by the confinement of the van. Caged. Moved from one box to another. You are all insects in jars, waiting to be crushed. The venomous thoughts scraped at the edges of Izuku's consciousness, a constant, abrasive pressure. Their destination wasn't the 1A dorms. They bypassed the main school building entirely, driving down a service road to the sprawling complex of training grounds. They stopped before the monolithic structure of Training Ground Gamma, the labyrinth of industrial pipes and concrete towers dark and imposing against the starry sky. Aizawa led them not inside the gym itself, but to a heavy blast door set into its foundation. Gamma's supplementary bunker, Aizawa explained, his voice echoing in the quiet night. It's shielded against electromagnetic and seismic disturbances. Completely soundproof. Power is on a closed grid. Nothing gets in or out without authorization. It's the most secure place on campus outside of Nisa's office. It was a prison. A well-intentioned, state-of-the-art prison. The interior was Spartan, a single bed, a small desk, a bathroom, and a wall of monitors that were currently dark. Cameras were visible in the upper corners of the room. As the heavy door sealed shut behind them with a resounding thud and the hiss of hydraulics, the finality of the situation settled over Izuku. He was isolated. He was a potential threat. "This isn't a punishment, Midoriya," Aizawa said, his tone softening slightly as he saw the flicker of fear in the boy's eyes. "It's a precaution. We are in completely uncharted territory. A quirk that commands the dead. There is no version of that, problem child, that isn't terrifying. We need to understand it. We need to know its limits, its costs, and most importantly, if it can be controlled. Or if it's controlling you." All Might put a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "Aizawa is right, my boy. We fear what we don't understand. This power, it feels cold. Alien. It doesn't feel like one for all, but you are not a villain. I know you are not. We have to be sure. For your sake as much as anyone else's." The fear in All Might's eyes was the worst part. It wasn't the fear of a villain or an attack. It was the fear a father has for a son who has contracted a terrible, unknown disease. The fear of corruption. They left him with a simple instruction: rest, and then, they would begin to seek answers. As the door sealed him in, Izuku sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the hum of the ventilation the only sound. His two spectral companions materialized in the room with him, their presence a constant, undeniable fact. He was alone, yet he was the most crowded person on the planet. The next morning, All Might returned. He looked as if he hadn't slept. He instructed Izuku on a deep meditation technique, one he had used himself to try and commune with the vestiges of One for All. "If the source of this power is tied to One for All," he reasoned, his voice strained, "then the previous users may hold the key. They are a part of the quirk. A part of you. You must go to them. Ask them, demand answers." Izuku sat cross-legged on the floor of the bunker. It was harder to focus than ever before. Ashmaker's hateful static was a constant distraction, and Krust's dutiful presence, while comforting, was still another consciousness sharing his headspace. He struggled to find the quiet center within himself, the gateway to the vestige realm. Slowly, painstakingly, he descended. He pushed past the noise, past the fear, and reached for the familiar, warm core of One for All. He found it, but it was changed. The vestige realm had always been a serene, dreamlike space, a vast, dark expanse filled with the soft, star-like lights of the previous users' consciousnesses. Now it was tainted. Veins of shadow, thin as spider silk, snaked through the darkness, pulsing with a faint, cold light. The ambient silence was gone, replaced by a low, whispering static that sounded like voices on the edge of hearing. There was a chill in the starless sky that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space and everything to do with the cold of a grave. The vestiges were there, but they were distant, their forms flickering and indistinct. They were huddled together, as if for protection, their light dimmed by the encroaching shadows. As his consciousness fully entered the realm, they turned to face him, and he felt their collective shock and horror. "You!" a voice boomed. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, floated forward, his usual boisterous energy replaced with raw aggression. Black whip tendrils writhed around him, not playful but defensive. "What have you done to this place? What is this stench of death you've brought with you?" I didn't do anything," Izuku projected, his own spectral form wavering. "It just happened." "Happened?" another voice hissed. It was Haikid Shinomori, the fourth user, his face gaunt and pale. The zigzagging marks of danger sense on his face were glowing with a frantic, pained light. "This power you've unleashed, it is an anchor. It's dragging something cold and final into this world of will and energy. It is a violation." And the sixth user tried to shroud himself in smokescreen, but the gray wisps were thin and frayed, unable to fully conceal his trembling form. The second and third users stood silently, their judgment a palpable weight. It was Yoichi the first, who brought a semblance of order. His form, though fainter than the others, held a steady, calming light. Brothers. He is as lost as we are. Anger will not give us answers. He turned his gentle, luminous gaze to Izuku. Ninth. This power you wield, it feels like a corrupted echo of my brother's quirk. The ability to take and to hold. But it does not take quirks. It takes the soul itself. I don't want it! Izuku cried out, his desperation echoing through the mental space. I never asked for this. Crust died for me. I didn't want him to be gone. And now I'm a monster. A desecrator. The power is not what makes the monster. Yoichi's voice replied, soft but firm. It is the will of the one who wields it. One for All was born to fight a great evil. Every power within it, even this one, must be a tool for that purpose. But its origin, it is not of us. It is deeper. Older. He pointed a slender, glowing finger toward the center of the vestige realm, where the shadows were thickest. The source is there. It was always there, dormant, a seed of sorrow waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Your grief, your trauma, it was the catalyst. Izuku followed his gesture. In the very heart of One for All, where the core of its light should have been the brightest, there was now a swirling vortex of shadow and cold starlight. It was the source of the corruption, the heart of his new, terrible power. He felt a pull toward it, a strange sense of familiarity and profound sadness. Hesitantly, he floated toward the vortex. The other vestiges held back, their fear and mistrust a palpable barrier. As he drew closer, the whispering static grew louder, resolving into a single, sorrowful voice, a woman's voice, humming a half-remembered lullaby. He plunged into the heart of the shadow. For a moment, there was only cold and silence. Then, a figure coalesced before him. It was a woman with dark, kind eyes, a small beauty mark below her lip, and a smile that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. She wore a simple hero costume, practical and unadorned. It was a face he knew from statues, from All Might's stories, from the very legacy of the quirk he carried. Nana Shimura. The seventh user. She wasn't angry or afraid. She just looked sad. A deep, soul-crushing sadness was etched into her spectral features. So, she said, her voice the same as the whisper, filled with a gentle, melancholic resonance. It finally woke up. I'm so sorry, my boy. You. Izuku was bewildered. You're the source of this, not me. She clarified, her form wavering slightly. Not my quirk. But my blood. My legacy. Before I inherited One for All, my family had strange quirks. Nothing flashy. My grandmother, her quirk was called resonance. She could feel the echoes of strong emotions left on objects, in places. She often said she could feel the shape of people who had recently passed. A faint, lingering energy she called a soul print. She looked down at her own spectral hands. It was a weak, passive quirk. When I inherited One for All, a dormant, mutated factor of that resonance passed into the core along with my own will and my quirk float. For generations, it lay sleeping, a forgotten scrap of genetic code, amplified and preserved by the stockpiling power of One for All. She met his eyes, and he saw a flicker of guilt in their depths. It was never supposed to awaken. But a perfect storm occurred. The stockpiled power reached a new zenith with you. My own will to protect my legacy, my grandson, is particularly strong within this realm. And then you experienced a trauma so profound, a grief so absolute, that it acted as a key. Your desperate desire to hold on to a fallen hero, to deny the finality of death, it resonated with that dormant power. My will, your trauma, and the latent quirk all combined. It didn't just awaken the power to sense echoes. It gave it the strength to grasp them. To bind them. It all clicked into place. This wasn't some random, monstrous power. It was a tragic inheritance, a genetic ghost that had haunted One for All for decades, waiting for the right host and the right tragedy. I'm so sorry, Nana repeated, her voice thick with regret. I passed this flaw, this curse, into the power that was meant to be a symbol of hope. Before Izuku could respond, a searing pain ripped through his consciousness. It wasn't from the vestige realm, it was from the outside. From his body in the bunker. He cried out, clutching his head as a new voice, a new presence, screamed into his mind. It was a voice filled with terror and utter confusion. What's happening? Where am I? The ambulance, the villain's shrapnel. Oh God, I think I'm dead. What is this place? The intrusion was so violent it shattered the delicate connection to the vestige realm. Izuku was thrown from the mental space, his consciousness slamming back into his physical body with a painful jolt. He gasped, his eyes flying open. He was back on the floor of the bunker. All Might was kneeling over him, shaking his shoulder, his face a mask of panic. Young Midoriya! Izuku! Are you alright? You were seizing! Izuku couldn't answer. The barracks in his head was no longer a duet. It was a trio. Alongside Crust's steadfast calm and Ashmaker's boiling rage, there was a new entity, a panicked, terrified spirit flickering with blue-white energy. He could feel the new ghost confusion, his fear, his dawning horror, as he realized his own state. A third soldier had just been conscripted into his unwilling army. The news report came an hour later, broadcast on the small television Aizawa had permitted him. A C-list villain with a metal manipulation quirk had been cornered by heroes in the city. During the confrontation, the villain had unleashed a final, desperate attack, a storm of razor-sharp debris. A promising young sidekick had been caught in the blast and had died en route to the hospital. The hero's name was Kido Tensei. His agency name was Insight, and his quirk, Synaptic Playback, allowed him to perfectly recall and replay any sensory information he had ever experienced with total clarity. He was now standing, or rather, flickering nervously, next to Crust at the foot of Izuku's bed. His spectral form was unstable, a jittery collection of blue-white light, his hero costume still showing the ethereal wounds from the attack that had killed him. This is impossible. Insight's thoughts flooded Izuku's mind, a frantic, analytical torrent. My consciousness has been displaced from my physical form but remains coherent. I am perceiving a shared mental space with two other entities, one benevolent, one malevolent, all anchored to a central consciousness, you. This defies every known law of physics and metaphysics. Crust's golden form turned to the panicked newcomer. A wave of calm authority emanated from him. Easy, soldier. The commander will explain. Panicking will not help the situation. Commander? Soldier? Is this a military operation? Am I in some kind of post-death quirk-induced purgatory? The constant, overlapping chatter was becoming unbearable. Izuku buried his face in his hands, a low groan escaping his lips. He hadn't even been trying. His quirk had reached out on its own, a predatory, automatic instinct, and snatched a freshly departed soul. He had no control. The weight of it, the sheer ethical horror of what he was doing, threatened to break him. He wasn't just commanding the dead. He was stealing them. It was All Might who came up with the final, desperate gambit. After Izuku explained what he had learned from Nana Shimura, a flicker of a wild, improbable idea had ignited in the hero's eyes. 2 days later, the black van returned. This time, they drove out of the city, into the quiet, green countryside. They arrived at a place that was both beautiful and profoundly sad, the National Heroes Cemetery. They walked in silence down a path lined with cherry trees, past the gravestones of heroes whose names were legends. All Might stopped before a simple, elegant marble headstone. There were fresh flowers at its base. The name carved into the stone read, Shimura Nana, a hero, a mentor, a mother. She floated so others could soar. All Might stood before the grave for a long time, his shoulders slumped. He reached out a trembling hand and traced her name on the cold stone. I don't know if this is right, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. To disturb her rest, it feels like a desecration. But if what you say is true, my boy, if her will is truly a part of this, then we need her. You need her. He turned to face Izuku, his eyes pleading. If there is any part of her left, any echo that can be reached, I need to know. We need to know. I can't guide you with this. I don't understand it. But she might. She is its source. He took a deep breath, the act seeming to cost him a great deal of strength. I give you permission. Try. Call to her. Izuku's heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. This was the ultimate test. It felt profoundly wrong, standing here in this sacred place, about to use his dark power to disturb the grave of his mentor's own beloved master. But looking at All Might's desperate face, hearing the panicked, analytical ramblings of Insight and the hateful snarling of Ashmaker in his head, he knew he had no other choice. He couldn't live like this. He needed a guide. He closed his eyes. He didn't focus on his own power. Instead, he reached for the memory of the Vestige realm, for the connection he had already forged with the seventh user. He thought of her sad smile, her gentle voice, the immense regret and strength he had felt from her. He didn't shout or command. He sent out a call, a plea, from the very core of his soul, down the unique tether that bound him to her through the river of one for all. Nana Shimura. I need your help. The air grew still. The birdsong from the cherry trees ceased. A sudden, deep chill settled over the cemetery, far more profound than the cold he had generated before. The grass at the base of the grave frosted over, turning a brittle, sparkling white. The sunlight seemed to dim, as if a cloud had passed over the sun, but the sky was perfectly clear. All Might gasped, taking a step back. From the earth before the headstone, a soft, ethereal light began to glow. It wasn't the brilliant gold of Crust or the chaotic crimson of Ashmaker. It was a gentle, pearlescent white, like moonlight on water. The light coalesced, rising from the ground not as a forceful summoning, but as a memory taking form. It took the shape of a woman. Nana Shimura stood before them, her spectral form more solid and defined than any he had manifested before. She looked exactly as she had in the Vestige realm, her kind, dark eyes filled with a timeless sorrow. She looked at her own gravestone, a flicker of sadness crossing her face, before turning her gaze to the two men standing before her. A warm, sad smile touched her lips. It was the same smile All Might had cherished in his memories for decades. The sight broke him. Tashinori Yagi let out a choked sob, tears streaming freely down his face as he collapsed to his knees. Master! He wept. Nana's spectral form drifted toward him, her movements graceful and weightless. She looked at her weeping student, her expression one of immense love and pain. Then, she turned to Izuku, who stood frozen, overwhelmed by the power he had unleashed. She reached out a shimmering, translucent hand and placed it on his shoulder. Her touch was not cold, but strangely warm, a comforting heat that seemed to quiet the raging storm in his mind for the first time. The hateful shrieking of Ashmaker subsided to a low growl. Insight's panicked thoughts fell silent. Even Crust's dutiful presence seemed to relax. For the first time since the attack, there was a moment of peace in his head. It's all right, my boy. Nana Shimura's voice echoed, not in the air, but directly in his mind, a calm, steady presence in the whispering barracks of his soul. I'm here now. It is a terrible burden I have given you. The least I can do is teach you how to carry it. The weeks following the revelation in the cemetery were a strange, tense purgatory. Izuku was released from the bunker, but not from his gilded cage. He was allowed to return to the Heights Alliance dorms, to attend classes, to participate in basic training, but he was never truly alone. A constant, invisible leash was held taut by Yuei's faculty. Aizawa's shadowed gaze followed him everywhere. All Might's worried check-ins became a daily ritual. He was a student again, but he was also a secret, a weapon kept under lock and key, a time bomb that Nizu and the others were cautiously trying to defuse. The biggest change, however, was internal. The barracks in his mind was no longer a chaotic riot. Under the spectral tutelage of Nana Shimura, Izuku had begun to learn control. She taught him not to silence the voices, an impossible task, but to compartmentalize them. He learned to build mental rooms within his consciousness, a conceptual barracks where his spectral soldiers resided. Crust, the ever-loyal soldier, occupied a space of calm, golden light, a ready room where his sense of duty was a comforting, steady presence. Insight, the newcomer, was in a library of cool blue energy, his thoughts a constant, analytical stream that Izuku could tap into for information but could also wall off when he needed to focus. Ashmaker was confined to a cell of solidified shadow, his hateful, nihilistic rage contained, though it still beat against the mental walls like a physical force. And then there was Nana. She did not reside in a room. She was the architect, a constant, guiding presence in the corridors of his mind, her calm voice a counterpoint to the chaos. Breathe, Izuku. You are the commander. This is your mind. You set the boundaries. You are the warden, not the prisoner. It was a fragile peace, bought at the cost of constant mental exertion. To his classmates, he seemed distant, perpetually tired, his eyes shadowed with a fatigue that sleep couldn't touch. They knew something was wrong, the secrecy surrounding his recovery, the way the teachers watched him, but they didn't know the impossible truth. He was a boy managing a ghost army in his head, and the strain was making him a ghost in his own life. The breaking point came during a joint training exercise with Class 1B. The scenario was set at a remote, decommissioned hero agency nestled in the mountainous region of Gunma Prefecture. The Trident Hero Agency, a three-pronged tower of concrete and glass, was slated for demolition, making it the perfect venue for a large-scale urban rescue simulation. The scenario is simple. Aizawa's voice crackled over their comms, his tone as brisk and unforgiving as the mountain wind. Villain attack has compromised the structural integrity of the central tower. There are 50 rescue dummies and 3 faculty members playing critically injured civilians trapped inside. Your objective is rescue and evacuation. Priority 1 is minimizing further collapse. This is a finesse mission, not a brawl. He paused, and Izuku felt his teacher's gaze on him from the observation post half a mile away. Midoriya, you are on point for internal assessment with Uraraka and Ida. Your team's job is to secure a path for the others. You are on a strict no-use order for your secondary quirk manifestation. Your role today is observation and analysis. Is that understood? The message was clear. Don't you dare unleash your ghosts. The faculty knew, but they didn't trust the power. They were terrified of it, and they were terrified of what it was doing to him. Yes, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku replied, his voice tight. Inside his head, the reaction was immediate. A wise precaution, Commander, came Crust's steady thought. This power should not be used lightly. Analysis indicates a 98.7% probability of mission success without resorting to spectral assets. Insight's cool, data-driven voice added. Ashmaker simply snarled, a wave of frustrated malice from his mental cell. Cowards! Hiding their sharpest blade. Let me out! Let me level this pathetic tower. Nana's presence was a calming hand on his mental shoulder. He is right to be cautious, Izuku. This power comes at a great cost. Listen to your teacher. Deku? You okay? Uraraka asked, her round face etched with concern. She adjusted her helmet, her expression gentle. You spaced out for a second there. I'm fine. Izuku forced a smile. Just running through the mission parameters. Let's do this. The exercise began smoothly. Ida's speed allowed them to scout the perimeter quickly. Uraraka's quirk was invaluable for clearing debris and making injured civilians weightless for easy transport. Izuku, using a finely controlled full cowling, moved through the groaning structure like a phantom, his analytical mind identifying stress fractures and weak points, calling them out to the other teams. It was working. He felt a flicker of his old self, the hero in training, not the master of the dead. They were 20 minutes in, evacuating the final set of dummies from an upper floor, when the world exploded. It wasn't a simulated explosion. This was real. A wave of incandescent blue flame, hot enough to melt steel and turn concrete to slag, erupted from the base of the tower. The entire structure shuddered, a deep, resonant groan echoing through the mountain pass as a primary support column was instantly vaporized. An alarm klaxon, shrill and real, blared from the observation post. Aizawa's voice, stripped of all its board detachment, screamed over the comms. All students, evacuate! Evacuate now! This is not a drill. We are under attack. Real villains. Code Crimson. Chaos erupted. The League of Villains. It had to be. Through a gaping new hole in the wall, Izuku saw the source. Dabi stood amidst the blue inferno, a sadistic grin on his stitched-together face. And beside him, multiplying with manic glee, were dozens, then hundreds, of clones of Twice. A sad man's parade. Well, look what we found! Dabi's voice, amplified by the acoustics of the valley, was a lazy, menacing drawl. A whole nest of hero eggs. Let's see how they scramble. The local pro-heroes assigned to oversee the exercise were the first to engage, but they were horrifically outmatched. A hero whose quirk let him control water was turned to steam before he could even mount an attack. Another, a hero with a hardening quirk, was simply swarmed by a tidal wave of twice clones, their tape measures flashing like deadly silver ribbons. "Students, fall back to the rally point," Aizawa commanded, his voice strained. "Do not engage! I repeat, do not engage!" But the League wasn't there for the students. Their goal was the agency building itself. Dalby unleashed another torrent of fire, blasting open a reinforced door leading to the sublevels. "They're after something inside," Izuku muttered, his mind racing. Nana's training allowed him to maintain a sliver of analytical calm amidst the panic. Sublevel 3 contains a high-security holding cell and a defunct quirk research lab. Insight's voice supplied instantly in his mind, overlaying a mental blueprint of the facility. Records indicate the last project housed there involved the development and containment of the quirk-enhancing drug, Trigger. The chief chemist, a villain named Dr. Kenji, was also held there before his transfer to Tartarus was finalized. "They're here for the Trigger research," Izuku said aloud, turning to his teammates. "Or the chemist himself. We have to stop them," Ida declared, his engines flaring to life. "We must protect the facility and aid the pro-heroes. Our orders are to retreat, Ida-kun," Uraraka countered, her voice trembling but firm. Before they could argue, the decision was made for them. A massive section of the ceiling above them, fatally weakened by the explosion, gave way. A slab of concrete the size of a bus plummeted towards them. Ida was fast enough to push Uraraka out of the way, but not himself. He looked up, his eyes wide behind his visor, as his doom descended. Izuku didn't think. He reacted. Pushing full culling to a dangerous 25%, he became a green blur, appearing beside Ida and throwing his entire body into a Delaware smash. The focused blast of air met the falling concrete, shattering it into 1,000 smaller, but still lethal, pieces of shrapnel. They were alive, but they were exposed. And Dalby had seen them, the little Yurei brats. He sneered, raising a hand. A ball of blue fire, concentrated and terrifying, began to form in his palm. "Let's start with the one in the armor." Ida, still recovering from the near miss, revved his engines. "I will not fall back while a villain threatens others," he yelled, a cry of pure, righteous fury. He shot forward, a silver and blue missile, aiming a recipro burst kick straight at Dalby's head. It was brave. It was heroic. It was hopelessly foolish. Dalby sidestepped the kick with casual, almost lazy grace. Ida shot past him, his momentum carrying him into the open. As Ida struggled to turn, Dalby was already there, his other hand outstretched, blue flames licking at the air just inches from Ida's helmet. "Goodbye, Ingenium Jr., Dalby whispered. At the same time, on the other side of the debris field, Uraraka was fighting for her life. A dozen twice clones, cackling madly, had swarmed her position. She was skilled, using her quirk to make them weightless and send them spinning into each other, but for every one she disabled, 2 more took its place. One of the clones got close, tackling her to the ground. She kicked it off, but another was on her, and another. She was being buried under a pile of manic, giggling bodies. Izuku saw it all. 2 of his dearest friends, on the verge of death, in 2 different places at once. He could only save one. Aizawa's order echoed in his ears. "Do not engage!" His own promise, his own limitation, screamed in his soul. "It's too dangerous. The cost is too high." But the image of Dalby's fire melting Ida's helmet, the sound of Uraraka's choked cry as she was overwhelmed, they were louder. "This is a choice, Izuku," Nana's voice whispered in his mind, her tone somber, not judging, not commanding, simply stating a terrible truth. "A hero's choice. The shield is for others, Commander," Crust's resolute thought followed. "Probability of Class 1A casualty, 87% and rising," Insight stated, his voice cold as a coroner's report. Ashmaker shrieked with glee from his cell. "Yes. Let US loose. Burn. Decay. Unmake them all." "I'm sorry, Aizawa-sensei," Izuku whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He closed his eyes and opened the floodgates. The temperature on the battlefield plummeted. A visible wave of cold radiated out from Izuku, frost spiderwebbing across the broken concrete at his feet. His nose began to bleed, the hot crimson drops steaming as they hit the freezing ground. A low, powerful hum, like a massive turbine spinning to life, filled the air. Dabi paused, his flames flickering as he glanced over at Izuku, an intrigued frown on his face. "What's this now?" He never got his answer. In the space between Dabi's hand and Ida's helmet, the air shimmered. Golden light bled into reality, coalescing with impossible speed into the solid, radiant form of the pro-hero crust. He stood a full head taller than Dabi, a fortress of spectral light and heroic resolve. With a motion too fast for the eye to follow, he slammed his ethereal hands together. A massive, layered shield of pure golden energy erupted into existence. Dabi's blast of fire, which would have instantly killed Ida, slammed into the shield. It was like watching the ocean crash against a cliff. Blue flames washed over the golden barrier, hissing and spitting, but not a single spark passed through. Ida, on the ground, could only stare in stunned silence at the back of the hero who had been declared dead for weeks. Dabi's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What the ghost?" Izuku wasn't finished. While his energy poured into maintaining Crust's shield, another part of his mind opened a different channel: insight. Tactical analysis. Now, his vision shifted. The world was suddenly overlaid with a stream of light blue data. Trajectory lines, structural weak points, and biometric readings flickered across his sight. He saw the chaotic mess of twice clones swarming Uraraka, but through Insight's quirk, he saw more. He saw the minute differences in their movements, the slight delay in the clones' reactions compared to the original. A faint, glowing red wireframe highlighted one figure in the middle of the pack, the real one. Target acquired, Izuku thought, his body already in motion. He pushed off, a green lightning bolt arcing over the battlefield. But he wasn't just fast. He was preternaturally accurate. Insight's power fed him the perfect path, a route through the chaos that was a half-second ahead of reality. He dodged a lunging clone he hadn't even seen yet, his foot landing on a piece of debris that Insight had already marked as stable. He landed in the middle of the swarm, grabbed the real twice by the collar of his suit, and with a single, focused 15% kick, sent him flying into the wall of the tower, knocking him unconscious. Instantly, all the clones dissolved into goop. Uraraka scrambled to her feet, gasping for air, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and bewildered terror, as she stared at Deku. "Deku, how did you?" But the battle was far from over. Dozens of Twice's original clones, created before he was knocked out, were still active, and they were converging. And Dabi, recovering from his shock, was now furious. "I don't care what kind of trick this is," he roared, unleashing a massive wave of fire at Crust's shield. "I'll burn your ghost back to whatever hell it crawled out of." The shield held, but Izuku felt the strain. It was like holding up a mountain. His head was pounding, the blood from his nose now a steady stream. He needed more power. He needed an attack. He looked at the seething, hateful presence in the dark cell in his mind. "I'm sorry," he thought, not to the villain, but to himself. "I'm so sorry." He reached out with his will, not with a request, but with an ironclad command. He seized Ashmaker's spectral form, feeling the villain's shriek of outrage as he was bent to Izuku's will. It felt disgusting, like puppeteering a corpse. Izuku felt the villain's hatred, his desire for destruction, and had to channel it, to aim it. A second spectral form materialized beside Izuku. It was a chaotic, writhing vortex of crimson and black energy, shackled in chains of shadow. Ashmaker's ghost raised a hand, and a pulse of the familiar, horrifying gray unmaking energy shot out, not at a person, but at the ground beneath the feet of the advancing Twice clones. The concrete and earth simply vanished, dissolving into a cloud of silent, gray dust. A dozen clones tumbled into the newly created chasm, their manic cries cut short. It was brutally effective. It was monstrous. The remaining villains and heroes, and all of Class 1A watching from the evacuation point, were frozen in a state of collective shock. They were witnessing the impossible, a boy commanding the spirits of a dead hero and a dead villain simultaneously. It was in that moment of stunned silence that a new threat emerged. A Twice clone, unnoticed in the chaos, had ripped a massive sheet of reinforced steel from the building's damaged frame. With a mad cackle, it swung the jagged metal plate like a club, aiming to decapitate the stunned Ida. There was no time for Crust to move. No time for Izuku to react. "Commander, a new asset is required," Insight's voice stated calmly in his head. "There is a strong residual echo nearby. From the Kamino incident. High compatibility with the current tactical need." Izuku didn't know who Insight meant, but he trusted the analysis. He was already running on fumes, his vision tunneling. He reached out with his power, not to a spirit he already held, but blindly into the ether, searching for the echo Insight had detected. He found it. A powerful, defiant, and deeply sorrowful presence. He latched onto it and pulled. The air next to the charging clone ripped open with a flash of violet light. A new figure materialized. It was a woman in a striking, punk rock-inspired villain costume, with short spiked hair and goggles. Her spectral form was stable, defiant, and crackling with magnetic energy. "Big Sis Magna." She looked around, her spectral eyes wide with confusion. "What is this? Chisaki? That bastard, where am I?" Her gaze fell upon the twice clone, then on Dabi, and a look of dawning recognition crossed her face. Then her eyes found Izuku, and she felt the undeniable pull of his command, the psychic leash that now bound her to him. Her confusion curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. "You!" she shrieked, the sound echoing in Izuku's mind like shattering glass. "The UA kid! What have you done to me? Let me go!" Izuku felt her fury, her sense of betrayal, her love for her league comrades. It was a wave of emotional agony that nearly brought him to his knees. But he couldn't stop. Ida was about to die. With a silent, guttural scream of his own will, he forced his command upon her. "The metal! Stop it!" Magna's body moved against her will. Her face was a mask of horrified fury, tears of spectral energy streaming from her eyes. She raised a hand, and her magnetism quirk flared to life. The massive steel plate was torn from the twice clone's grasp, hovering in midair. The clone, stunned, was a perfect target. With another surge of Izuku's will, Magna's arms swung, and the steel plate, imbued with immense magnetic force, slammed into the clone, obliterating it in a shower of gray goop. That was the final straw for the League. Dabi stared at the ghost of his fallen comrade being used as a puppet, his sadistic grin gone, replaced by a look of cold, murderous fury mixed with something else, bewilderment. "What are you?" he snarled at Izuku. He looked at the unconscious twice, at the ghosts of a hero, a C-list villain, and his own friend. The mission was a failure. The situation had spiraled into something incomprehensible. "We're leaving," he declared, grabbing Twice's body. The remaining clones fell back, covering their retreat with a final, desperate volley of fire that Crust's shield easily absorbed. In seconds they had vanished into the dense mountain forest. The battlefield fell silent. The only sounds were the crackling of Dabi's lingering flames and the ragged, gasping breaths of Izuku Midoriya. He released his hold. The spectral forms of Crust, Ashmaker, and Magna faded from view, their presences retreating back into his mind. The cost of summoning and controlling three spirits, one of them actively hostile, had pushed him far beyond his limit. He collapsed to his knees, vomiting onto the frosted ground. His vision was a gray blur. The voices in his head were a roaring, agonizing tempest. Crust's quiet approval, Ashmaker's sated bloodlust, Insight's post-mission analysis, and worst of all, Magna's heartbroken, furious sobs, a sound of pure betrayal that would haunt him forever. He had saved them. He had won. But he felt like a monster. He was vaguely aware of his classmates approaching, their footsteps hesitant. He looked up and saw their faces. Ida, who owed him his life, was staring at him with gratitude warring with a deep, horrified revulsion. Uraraka was crying, her expression one of profound fear, not of him, but for him. Bakugo's usual explosive anger was gone, replaced by a stunned, almost fearful silence, his red eyes wide as he tried to process the sheer, impossible scale of the power he had just witnessed. Todoroki's face was a cold, stoic mask, but his eyes held a familiar, chilling understanding, the look of someone who knew the terrible cost of power. Aizawa landed silently beside him, his capture weapon coiling back around his neck. He looked at the devastation, at the terrified faces of his students, and finally at Izuku, who was still on his knees, trembling and bleeding. His teacher's voice was quiet, devoid of anger, filled only with a deep, weary sorrow. "The problem isn't that you broke the rules, Midoriya," Aizawa said, his words cutting deeper than any reprimand. "The problem is what you had to become to do it." The silence in the aftermath was a living entity, thick and suffocating. It filled the spaces between the crackling of Dabi's dying flames and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Izuku's classmates kept their distance, forming a loose, hesitant circle around him. They weren't looking at a friend who had saved the day. They were looking at a phenomenon, a terrifying force of nature they no longer understood. Ida's gratitude was visible, but it was buried under a thick layer of horrified awe. Uraraka's tears were not of relief, but of fear for him. Even Bakugo was unnervingly quiet, his crimson eyes wide, processing a power that defied all conventional metrics of strength. Aizawa's words hung in the cold mountain air, a final, damning verdict. "The problem is what you had to become to do it." That sentence became the mantra of the next 48 hours. Izuku was immediately separated from his classmates and sequestered in a secure medical wing back at UA. The official story for the students was that he had suffered a severe case of quirk backlash that required specialized observation. The truth was far simpler. He was in quarantine. His mental barracks was a tempest. Magna's spirit was a raw, open wound of betrayal, her sobs echoing in a chamber of his mind he tried desperately to soundproof. Ashmaker was a snarling beast, sated but still hungry, reveling in the destruction he had been forced to cause. Insight was running endless, detached analyses of the battle, his calm logic a chilling counterpoint to the emotional chaos. Crust was a steady, silent presence, radiating a somber approval of Izuku's choice to protect his friends. And through it all, Nana Shimura was a beacon of sorrowful understanding, offering what little comfort she could. "You saved them, Izuku," her thoughts were a gentle balm. "That is the first and only duty of a hero. The cost, that is the burden of a commander." The cost became apparent on the third day. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, ominous purr of expensive engines. A fleet of black, unmarked sedans swept through the gates of UA, their tinted windows reflecting the school's proud architecture with cold indifference. Men and women in sharp, immaculate black suits emerged, their faces impassive, their movements economical. They were not heroes. They were bureaucrats, the kind who wielded power not through quirks, but through directives and designations. They were from the Hero Public Safety Commission. The meeting took place in Principal Nise's office. It was a place Izuku had always associated with a strange, comforting eccentricity, with its oversized furniture and the principal's cheerful, analytical demeanor. Today, it felt like a courtroom where he was already on trial. Nizu, All Might, and Aizawa were present, but they were not in control. They sat to one side, a defensive line that had already been breached. Authority sat behind Nise's desk. She was a woman in her late 50s, her graying hair pulled back into a severe, perfect bun. Her suit was charcoal gray, her face a mask of disciplined neutrality. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, held no warmth, only an unnerving analytical focus. She was the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission. "Izuku Midoriya," she began, her voice as crisp and sterile as the files she placed on the desk before her. She didn't ask how he was. She didn't acknowledge his youth. She addressed him as one would address a line item on a national security briefing. "Quirk, one for all. Secondary manifestation, provisionally designated Necrodominion, activated 4 weeks ago. Current capabilities include the binding and command of post-mortem spiritual essences, allowing for full physical and quirk-based manifestation at the cost of significant stamina to the wielder. Is this summary accurate?" Izuku, sitting ramrod straight in a chair that felt too large, could only nod. His teachers had prepped him, told him to answer honestly but concisely. The president steepled her fingers. "The incident at the Trident Agency has forced our hand. Your unauthorized use of this power resulted in the retreat of 2 high-value League of Villains members and the prevention of catastrophic casualties among UA students. From a results-based perspective, it was a success." She paused, letting the faint praise hang in the air before cutting it down. It was also the most reckless and dangerous breach of quirk usage protocol I have seen in my 20-year tenure. You unveiled a strategic-level weapon during a training exercise. He was defending his friends. All Might interjected, his voice a low rumble. They would have died. The president's gaze shifted to him, and it was like watching a glacier move. The HPSC deals in acceptable losses, All Might. A concept you were never comfortable with. What is not acceptable is an unregistered, unclassified S-rank quirk operating without oversight. A power that can puppeteer the dead, heroes and villains alike, is not a tool for a student. It is a national security asset. Or a national security threat. There is no middle ground. She turned her unnerving eyes back to Izuku. Tell me about the entities. Do they retain their personalities? Their memories? Izuku hesitated, the sobs of Magna echoing in his mind. He thought of his promise to her, his guilt over using her against her own family. Yes, he said, his voice quiet but clear. They are themselves. They remember everything. And you hold absolute command? Yes. The president's expression didn't change, but Izuku sensed a flicker of something in her eyes, not horror, but intense, calculating interest. Fascinating. A perfect intelligence asset. The ability to interrogate the dead. The capacity to wield the quirks of fallen enemies. The potential is staggering. It's a desecration, Aizawa said, his voice low and tight with fury. He's a child, not a weapon. He stopped being a child the moment he inherited One for All. The president countered smoothly. And he certainly stopped being one when he became a necromancer. We are past the point of protecting his innocence, Aizawa. We are now at the stage of containment and utilization. It was then that Izuku noticed the fourth person in the room, standing silently in the corner shadows near the window, almost perfectly still. He hadn't seen her enter. She was tall and slender, dressed in a sleek, dark hero costume that seemed to absorb the light. A long, cylindrical case, unmistakably for a high-caliber rifle, was slung over her back. Her long, bicolored hair was tied back, and her eyes, sharp and focused, were locked onto him. She hadn't been watching the conversation, she had been watching him, assessing him, as a sniper assesses a target. Lady Nagant? The former pro-hero, turned HPSC assassin now, what? The president followed his gaze. As I said? Containment and utilization. Midoriya, your time as a regular student is over. You will continue your studies at UA, but your work studies, your provisional licensing, and your quirk development will now fall under the direct jurisdiction of the Hero Public Safety Commission. She gestured to the woman in the corner. This is Lady Nagant. She has been reinstated to active duty on special assignment. She will be your handler, your partner, your trainer. She will teach you to control your power, to view it not with guilt and horror, but as the tool it is. Her mission parameters are simple, to ensure you follow ours. Wherever you go, she will go. She will be your shadow. Lady Nagant stepped forward, her boots making no sound on the polished floor. She stopped a few feet from Izuku, her gaze analytical. Can you manifest more than one at a time? She asked, her voice a cool, professional monotone. Ah, yes. 3 so far, Izuku admitted. What's your effective range of command? I don't know. We'll find out, she stated, as if discussing the weather. Her eyes were devoid of judgment, but also of empathy. He was a piece of equipment she was learning to operate. You can't do this! All Might stood, his skeletal form trembling with a rare display of fury. He is the inheritor of One for All. He is not your personal Black Ops soldier. The president finally showed a flicker of emotion, a thin, humorless smile. That is precisely what he is, Tashinori. He is the most powerful weapon this country has seen in a generation, and we are at war. I will not let him sit in a classroom learning ethics while the world burns. She stood, her authority absolute. She gave Izuku a choice that was no choice at all. You have 2 options, Izuku Midoriya. You can accept this arrangement. You will work for us, for your country. You will be deployed on missions of our choosing, eliminating threats that are beyond the scope of traditional heroes. You will become the shield and sword we need you to be, or Her voice dropped, losing its corporate chill and gaining the cold finality of a judge's sentence. You can refuse. In which case, your quirk will be officially designated a Class S national threat, and you, its unstable wielder, will be remanded to the deepest, most secure cell in Tartarus for the foreseeable future. We will not kill you. We will simply put you on a shelf. The room was deathly silent. Nisa looked grim. Aizawa was clenching his fists so hard his knuckles were white. All Might looked defeated, the weight of his past decisions, of passing on this now corrupted power, crashing down on him. Izuku looked at the president, then at his new shadow, Lady Nagant. He thought of his friends, of the world outside this room. He thought of Magna's sobs. If he was locked away, what would happen to the souls bound to him? Would they be trapped in the dark with him forever? Could he condemn them to that? This is the commander's choice, Izuku, Nana's voice whispered, a somber echo in his soul. Not between good and evil, but between one terrible necessity and another. He was a hero. And a hero's job was to save people. Even if it meant sacrificing himself, his freedom, his very soul. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice steady, devoid of the fear and hesitation that was churning in his gut. The president nodded once, a gesture of finality. I thought you might. Nagant. The asset is yours. Begin his training immediately. His new life began an hour later. Lady Nagant led him to a private training ground, a stark concrete expanse far from the rest of the campus facilities. Manifest the villain, she ordered, taking a position 100 meters away. The one you used in the mountain, Izuku flinched. The thought of forcing Ashmaker's presence into the world again made him feel ill. Why, your control over the hostile entities is your biggest weakness, she stated, her voice flat. You hesitate. You feel guilt. Guilt gets you killed. It gets your allies killed. You need to view them as you would view a firearm. It is a dangerous tool that you must master. It has no feelings. It has a function. Now manifest him. He hated it. But he understood the brutal logic. With a deep breath, he reached into the dark cell in his mind and dragged Ashmaker's screaming consciousness into the light. The crimson and black specter appeared, thrashing against its shadowy chains, its silent hatred a palpable wave of cold. Good, Nagant said, unimpressed. She unslung her rifle. With a fluid, practiced motion, she took aim. Now, have him use his quirk. Target that pillar to your left. But, that was an order, Midoriya. Gritting his teeth, Izuku forced his will upon the enraged spirit. Ashmaker's arm moved, and a pulse of gray decay shot out, striking the concrete pillar. The top half of it dissolved into dust. The strain gave Izuku a nosebleed, but he held the manifestation steady. Crack! The sound of the rifle shot was deafening. A bullet, glowing with a faint energy, ripped through the air and struck Ashmaker's spectral form in the chest. The spirit didn't cry out, but its form wavered violently, and Izuku felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his own chest, as if the bullet had hit him. The link between them frayed for a horrifying second. What was that? He gasped, clutching his chest. That was a warning shot, Nagant said, her rifle still trained on the ghost. My bullets can be curved. They can be made from my own hair to track a target. They can also be imbued with a mild electromagnetic charge. It seems your spirits are vulnerable to it. It disrupts the energy you use to manifest them. She lowered the rifle slightly, her eyes locking with his. Let me be clear. My first job is to ensure you complete your missions. My second job, should you ever lose control, defy a direct command in a critical situation, or turn against us, is to put you down. I will shoot your ghost out of the air, and then I will put a bullet in you. Do you understand our relationship now, Midoriya? He understood perfectly. She wasn't his partner. She wasn't his trainer. She was his executioner. He stood there under the harsh afternoon sun, bleeding from the nose, his chest aching from a ghost's wound, with a resentful villain's spirit raging beside him and a trained killer watching him through a sniper scope. This was his new reality. He was a weapon on a leash, held by a woman who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. He had made his choice. Now, all he could do was learn to live with the cost.